a master's degree, a master's in Russian, East European, and Eurasian studies at the University of Illinois. Yes, I'm the only one at the university. Yeah.
Wow. That's
And there are
remarkable.
very few across, and there are like these East European centers around the country, and they're just a handful of us. But I'm the only one at the University of Illinois. It's probably about, I guess the 70 years that these programs have been around, we may have 20 graduates.
Folks, you just caught me in mid-conversation with journalist, researcher, expert, writer, Terrell J. Starr. He's the host of his own YouTube channel. He is the editor of his own Substack, which you all should subscribe to. And we were just talking about how Terrell is the only Black doctorate from the University of Illinois who is an master's, who is an expert in Eastern European studies, Russia, and Ukraine. And right now, folks, Terrell is in Kyiv. He is in Ukraine. We actually have a Ukrainian expert in Ukraine right now to talk about the meeting that just happened between Trump and Putin, and also the meeting that's going to happen later today. Yes, because it's 1:30 a.m. where I am. It's 8:30 a.m. in Ukraine. And, instead of talking to experts who aren't experts on Ukraine, who don't talk to Ukrainians, let's talk to a man who's actually studied it, spent his life studying it, and is actually there right now. So before we talk about today's meeting, and for those who are going to be watching this later today, we're recording this Monday morning. President Zelensky is set to meet President Trump. As of this recording, President Trump on Sunday night on his broke down Truth Social wrote the following. President Zelensky of Ukraine could end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Remember how it started. No getting back Obama given Crimea 12 years ago without a shot being fired, and no going into NATO by Ukraine. Some things never change! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. No such attempts at conceding anything from Putin. Putin came here, spoke in Russian, dominated that meeting. No questions from the press. Red carpet was laid out. They spoke, God knows about what, in the car. Had a nice feast. Last time, Terrell, like I said, we keep the receipts. In February, Zelensky came, was berated by Pitbull J.D. Vance, mocked, humiliated, and left. This time around, he's coming with EU and NATO allies. But before we talk about today's meeting, your take and the word on the streets take about what happened on Friday between Trump and Putin.
No one expected anything productive on the Ukrainian side to come out of this meeting between Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and multiple times convicted felon Donald Trump. What people were doing here was pretty much waiting on the worst to get even more worse and to get even more desperate for Ukraine. And in fact, people here are in a waiting period, to be quite honest with you, and no one has really said this, is that they were just really hoping that they're just really hoping that over the next 3.5 years, the can is kicked down the road, ultimately. Because if the can is kicked down the road and you have a Democratic nominee to win in 2028 and somebody who will have a tougher stance, then that would give them a greater chance of survival to keep their land. Now, the initial reactions were that of betrayal, that when Zelensky went to the White House, like you said, he was berated. J.D. Vance jumped on him, but yet Putin was given the red carpet. In fact, a lot of people around this country, when I have conversations with them, they feel like Trump is compromised, or more specifically, they would say that Putin has compromised on Trump. And so those are the general consensus. So it wasn't a particular surprise, because at the end of the day, should we really have expected a different outcome from Trump, a man who is a multiple times convicted felon who should be in prison, who gave cover to an international fugitive who belongs in Hague?
I mean, look, man, we know this. I mean, as this is happening and you're in Ukraine, where Ukrainians are fighting off an occupation and invasion by Russia. Facts matter, folks. Donald Trump has promoted Russian talking points and propaganda. It wasn't Ukraine's fault, just like it's not the Palestinians' fault that they're being occupied right now. Russia invaded and occupied Ukraine. Ukraine is fighting for its independence. Israel is occupying Palestinians. Palestinians have a right to self-determination. And thankfully, you're not in America America right now because the National Guard has been unleashed in the nation's capital, Terrell, and also against U.S. residents in Los Angeles. But meanwhile, as he is sicking the National Guard and military against innocent American citizens, he is befriending, applauding, literally clapping for like a dog, no offense to dogs, and laying out the red carpet for a war criminal, Vladimir Putin, and echoing his talking points. And I'm just assuming, this must be, in addition to betrayal, you know, and I'm only going to share what I've heard from people who live abroad. My cousin was supposed to come here from Karachi. He studied here. He went back, and this is what he told me a couple months ago. True story. Hey man, I was going to come to America, but things look really bad right now, so I'm just going to stick in Karachi. When someone in Karachi is taking pity on you, you're like, man, things might be bad. I'm just curious, Ukrainians, when they see what's happening and they see this display, what is their thought about what's happening to America and their feelings about America itself?
The first reaction when he won was you all saw what happened the first time and you voted for it again. So a lot of Ukrainians have a very surface level uh appreciation of how tender and fragile American democracy is, and they didn't think that these issues honestly existed, to be quite frank. And I say this because as a Black American, one of the few that a lot of Ukrainians get to speak with, I show them a different side of America that they don't realize. So I have delivered several lectures at the biggest university in Ukraine, Terrell University here in Kyiv. And I always start off with this. I tell them that my grandparents lived under Jim Crow, and you all look at America as this big, powerful democracy, but in reality, up until 1970, my grandparents did not exercise full rights as citizens in this country. And the narrative has been that the USSR fell in 1991, and this was your first experience with democracy in 1991. I tell them that because America really became a democracy in 1970, when you consider the fact of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, and then you had 1968 with the Fair Housing Act, and then you have several years that it takes for those laws to be implemented. We have only been a functioning democracy for everyone in general for a little more than 55 years. And so America, when you look at it in that context, only has a 20-year start ahead of Ukraine when it comes to truly dealing with a democracy that does not infringe or limit everyone's rights. And so when you look at it that way, or you frame it that way, Ukrainians come out of it thinking that, oh, we're all trying to figure this out together. And in our own ways, we very much are. But the narrative about America has been, we are the strongest democracy in the world. And it's really white men who come here and sell this narrative about America. And so no wonder they're shocked. You weren't shocked about this. I'm not shocked about this because we understand our country and they don't. And so that's ultimately the result that comes when you have nothing but privileged white people who usually complete these type of programs to be over here like I am in the first place. And then you have the lone Black person like me that says, I don't experience America this way. And so that informs how I teach and educate people about America. And so you have a whole country of people here in Ukraine who are really starting to learn all of the really dirty, screwed up historical and current elements of American society. And so, just as we've grown up with this our whole life, this is their crash course, and it's in the very worst way.
Mm,
Because how I define it is that the anti-blackness and the anti, like the xenophobia, Islamophobia that people like us have to experience. Trump has turned it around on Ukrainians in a sense that, unlike the South Africans, they're not the type of white people that Trump cares about.
That's right.
right? That's what we need to think about. And so the Ukrainians who are able to, who for years have been able to come to America and integrate into whiteness, that doesn't fit for them anymore. And so, just from a personal experience, it's a bit of a shell shock because they're not supposed to be given even a monicum of the vitriol that we experience, but they're getting a little piece of it in their own foreign policy way. And so they don't have anyone to properly explain to them why. And how I define it is you are not the whites that Trump cares about because he cannot use you, which is the centerpiece of why he's so gullible to Putin, because this country means a lot more to him than it does to America and, quite frankly, Europe. And that's where we are right now. And so until that changes, Ukraine is going to always be in this position of disadvantage.
Yes, and I'm just very curious. When you explain to them the concept of whiteness in America and how they're not the chosen whites, much like in the past Italians or the Irish or the Germans, until they were absorbed into whiteness or assimilated, and then turn around and beat up those who are not white. How do they respond to it? Because what I've seen in Europe, whenever I try to go and explain white supremacy and whiteness, even to Brits, they're like, "What do you mean?" But I feel like right now, especially with what's happening with Ukraine, when they look white and they have blue eyes and blonde hair, still, because they're the bad whites, they're the bad guys. Much of MAGA, even though it's shifted, Terrell, I don't know if you've seen the polls, Trump has been so disastrous in everything that you saw last year before he was elected, it was a complete reversal, pro-Russia, anti-Ukraine. It's gone up 10, plus 10 for Ukraine when it comes to military aid and economic aid. But still, how do they process the fact that their whiteness will not protect them from Trump and white supremacy?
They don't understand the frameworks because they've never been taught them, and because they've never had to, because they've been in a particular position of privilege. Now, the way that I define it, because I understand this part of the world, is that first, we all know the obvious that race is a social construct. We know it in those simplest terms, right? But we understand that they have real world implications. What I do is I start off with them regionally, and I talk about what it's like for them as people who are Eastern Europeans, or more specific Slavs, right? They are not privileged within the Slavic aspect of it because the Russian is the king Slav in this part of the world. Because at the end of the day, Russia, so much about white supremacy or xenophobia, or when you think about China with the Uyghurs, for example, a lot of this is about ethnic cultural hegemony,
Yep.
right? In the real simplest terms, right? And so with the Russians, they have their own hegemony and they have their own supremacist frameworks that are quite honestly independent from Western Europeans and their hold on to slavery and on the continent of Africa and elsewhere across the world, because Russia has its own colonialized framework, which was the Soviet Union. That was a settler colonial states, the Soviet Union for starters. But before that, you had the Russian Empire, and the Ukrainians were always subjugated under both of those unions, and including this current iteration of the Russian Federation. And so I start off with what they know. That's the important thing. And so when you start off with what they know, then I ask them, do you want anyone else to experience that type of treatment? That requires you to have some reasonable knowledge to understand what really speaks to them as human beings, as people, because they can understand the Holodomor, right? Which is the purposefully driven starvation of their people. They understand what it means for Crimean Tatars and, and like other ethnic groups in Ukraine to be shipped off into Siberia under Stalin's purges. They get they get all of that. They understand what it means to have their language persecuted, to have it stripped from them. And to have Russians create slurs, right? That some of may argue would be that not argue, but they are ethnic slurs that are specific towards Ukrainians. And so I build from that, and then I talk about how when they enter to America, I do talk about the Irish. I do talk about how these other groups of people came in and they eventually integrated into whiteness, and Ukrainians are a part of that. And the real question is, do you have the real challenge I pose to them is, you have an opportunity to do something different. You
Right.
have the benefit of understanding your history, looking at things develop right now. You have the literal front row seat to see how Trump invited 60 or so South Africans under this ruse of racial persecution. Meanwhile, you have Putin and his state Russian television saying that Ukraine is not a real country. People using ethnic slurs to describe Ukrainians, and referring to Ukraine as in all kinds of really abhorrent names. And so, do you want that? Do you want to unwittingly perpetrate that against other groups of people? And then they say no. And so that's really how you start with them. And I found success in it. But honestly, what makes it challenging is that I'm the only one
Hmm.
because because you know, being a Black person here, I come with a social justice purpose, and I'm independent. So I don't work for a think tank. I don't work for the American embassy. I don't work for some corporation. So I can say these things, but you have to really be strong as an individual, because you don't have a whole lot of people coming in and reinforcing what you say, because a lot of it is that a lot of our fellow Americans, one, they're not politically educated about these things either, and two, they haven't undergone the pedagogy that the two of us have in order to explain this with confidence and persuasion, so that they can start to think about how they are positioned in today's times the way that they are.
Yeah, so that was excellent. And for those who are joining, the reason why I really enjoyed talking to Terrell, in addition for him being literally an expert in Ukraine, is because he connects the dots. And oftentimes you see the themes that are undercurrent but aren't noticeable to most folks: imperialism, white supremacy, racism, propaganda. And you see why Donald Trump looks up to Vladimir
Yeah.
Putin. You see the natural alliance with Benjamin Netanyahu. You see what's happening with Ukraine. You see what's happening with Palestinians. Similarly,
Mhm.
Israel says Palestinians are a fiction. They don't exist. They're a made up people. Russians look at Ukrainian as little Russians, or just Russians who forgot they were Russian. It all belongs to us anyway. And we're going to take it back. Can you explain real quick for people who are joining? What are Putin's ambitions towards Ukraine? And not just Ukraine, but also I would say the Crimea, Ukraine's, and also I would say Poland, right? Belarus. Like, what I don't think people realize Putin's endgame, or his ambitious endgame, and specifically how he's found a patsy in Trump.
Yes, absolutely. So what Putin wants to do is that he wants to control all of Ukraine, if not physically, at least politically, to make it such a weak country. And he wants it to essentially become a vassal state like Belarus. That is what he wants to do, which is the reason why he has lambasted President Volodymyr Zelensky as a crackhead, as someone who's a Nazi leader, even though this guy is a Jewish guy whose family was, has some history with, in the Holocaust, was killed in the Holocaust. All these things. He is really, he genuinely believes that Ukraine is indigenous Russian land.
Yep.
That's what he genuinely believes, when in fact it's not. And this is something that he tells Russian people um, each and every year in his ahistorical telling of Ukraine. On state television, there was one segment of him with a historian, and they were looking over a map that was supposedly showing that there was no history of Ukraine in this current state, even though, and this is the funny part, there was a word that specifically pointed to the fact that Ukraine actually existed as a country, right? So that was the ironic part. But that's what he wants to do. And what he also wants to do, as far as Poland, you bring up Poland, and they're interesting because Poland um, is one of those countries that has a higher increase of GDP every year, and they are aiming to be the most armed European country in all of Europe and all of NATO. And that's precisely because they have a history where And this goes back to the whole thing about how elusive whiteness can be. They were Poles, therefore they were Slavs, and so they weren't Anglo-Saxons. And so even though they knew that they had to worry about Russia and they fear Russia, they weren't necessarily sure that they would be completely accepted by Western Europe either. And so they have this self-reliance about their security that says, each time that we increase our business sector, we're going to devote so much more to our defense sector because we know that at the end of the day, we're going to have to protect ourselves. And the Europeans, you think about the British, the French, the Italians,
Mm.
the Germans are a different conversation because of they were partitioned by Russia up until 1989. That's another story. But generally speaking, Western Europeans don't understand what it means to be occupied by Russia. And so they have a greater sense of urgency than anyone else. And so that's why you see so many Eastern Europeans, the Baltic states, for example, saying that we are going to be there supporting Ukraine because they have a history of Russian occupation, whereas Western Europe doesn't. And so what Putin wants to do is, to the final point, in regards to NATO, do I genuinely believe that Putin at least immediately plans to attack NATO? No, because he can't. He doesn't have the capacity to do it. What he wants to do is undermine it politically to such a degree and take advantage of Western democracies that the populations will not want to fight, right? And so, because he doesn't have to use military force, all he has to use is disinformation. All he has to do is align with the ADF, Alternative for Deutschland, in Germany, which, according to a recent poll, since we talked about polls, the Alternative for Deutschland won this year's. They came in second place in this year's parliamentary elections in Germany with 20% of the vote. A recent poll shows that they have 26% of support right now, right? And so when you go, and then you have in France, you have a number of other countries in Britain, you have this threat of the far right. And so if the far right is friendly to me, all I have to do is finance the far right. All I
Yep.
have to do is undermine the center left, who is a bit wheezy about using military force, and I could do it that way. And so he doesn't have to attack NATO militarily. All he has to do is undermine it politically and just dangle the idea that at the end of the day, you all want Russian business. You all want Russian money. You all need, these Russian oligarchs that are there across Europe. You want the money and you need our oil. And Angela Merkel, who was in power in Germany for, I believe it was 4 terms, she spent all of her all of her chancellorship trying to bring Russia into the fold to make them, behave, to be, for simpler terms. But all Russia did was abuse and position themselves to do everything that they're doing right now, which is why Putin can go to Alaska and say, I want all of Donbass. I
Yep.
want, and I want to keep all of Crimea, because he's been researching them. He has been spying on them. He has been infiltrating them for the past 20 years, and realized that all I have to do is wave energy dependency over their heads. All I have to do all I have to do is manipulate their audiences in the far right. And that's all it takes. And so with Trump, he's the same way. Trump is a far right authoritarian who
Yep.
actually has more in common with Ukraine. So quite frankly, why would you expect Donald Trump, who is an authoritarian, to to align with a democratic leader like Zelensky, who actually cares about what the people think of him, versus Putin, a person who he aspires to be, a person who literally signed into law legislation that makes it illegal for you to beat your wife, laws that allow you to arrest teenagers and put them in jail for 5 to 10 years because they're opposed to war. And so that's what Trump wants. It benefits him to align with Putin, regardless of whether he's manipulated or not. That's who he wants to be. Zelensky doesn't give him anything. He doesn't even give him the whiteness to say that I'm protecting the fellow white man, because that's what my base supports. And it's just and even though it contradicts the polls that you rightfully brought up, showing that support in his base for Ukraine has gone up. Ironic.
And speaking about Putin, he has given money to Le Pen's party in France. He has tried to finance the far right. Right, you have Orban in Hungary, whom Steve Bannon says was Trump before Trump. You have Maloney in Italy, Poland. Just barely wrestled control back from the far right. You have Geert Wilders rising in Switzerland. You have the AfD in Germany, right? You have the right wing party in Austria. All these people, by the way, love Donald Trump. JD Vance just met Nigel Farage of the Reform UK Party, one of the leaders of Brexit. And also, by the way, JD Vance went and met with the AfD, with the history of pro Nazi, anti Semitic rhetoric. So this is happening in real time, folks. And Donald Trump lays out the red carpet for war criminal Vladimir Putin, who admitted publicly that yes, Russia did invade, excuse me, did interfere in the 2016 election. He repeated Russian propaganda. He repeated the lie about the 2020 election. He has the National Guard out terrorizing American people. I believe, Terrell, he will declare martial law. I've been saying it for several months now. I said, will unleash ICE as his Gestapo. And if it seems like it all goes to hell due to the economy and Epstein and overreach, all he'll have to do is use some propaganda, blame Antifa, I don't know, immigrants, invaders, unleash. And now he's funded. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's the disasters in America, but with the BBB, the Big Beautiful Bill, in addition to destroying Medicaid and adding $3 trillion to the debt, it adds $180 billion to ICE, boosts up the agents to 10,000 masked armed agents who are right now in the nation's capital, mocking on camera liberals, praising the Proud Boys. These people will be unleashed. Who's going to stop them, Terrell? Right. So when Putin comes, he sees someone who he can be. Ah, look at Putin. I want to be that. He's praised authoritarians. He's praised MBS. Right. Netanyahu, he gets dog walked by him. This is a man who's more aligned with Putin, MBS, and Netanyahu than he is with the American people or with our allies. And so I have to ask you, when Zelensky comes in a few hours and meets him, for those who forgot, in February, late February, when Zelensky came, he was publicly, the only reason for Zelensky to come on in late February was theater. JD Vance, Donald Trump ganged up on him, beat him up, humiliated him, mocked him. Marjorie Taylor Greene's boyfriend is now part of the press corps, asked him why he didn't wear a suit. Meanwhile, Kid Rock dresses like a clown. No one says anything. And then Zelensky gets humiliated and leaves. Meanwhile, Putin gets the red carpet. This time, Zelensky's coming with some backup. He has some posse. He's got some European allies with him to make sure that that shit doesn't happen again. But based off of Donald Trump's post from earlier tonight, where he's pretty much saying, hey, Zelensky, you got to make some concessions, even though he has nothing of Putin. So much so, folks, that when Fox ran, I don't know if you saw the Fox clip, they went to Fox right after, and Fox was shook. And the Fox correspondent, whose name I'm forgetting, folks, check out this clip. Her words, uh, Putin came in and steamrolled Donald Trump. That was on Fox. So what do you expect? What do you expect to happen in this meeting in a few hours with Zelensky? And what do Ukrainians expect to happen, Terrell?
In regards to this, no, the Ukrainians are not particularly optimistic at all here because as far as if you look at social media here and look at people talking on different shows, Trump has made up his mind about what he wants to do, and so again, it's a holding period because Trump is so unpredictable and he changes his mind. People just hope that the can is kicked down the road, and so when he talks about giving up land and territory here, there have been conversations about that. So let me tell you about the people I've spoken to or interviewed. But they would tell me their opinions on camera, but then they would go off camera and tell me the truth. And so these are people
Gotcha.
who are from currently Russian occupied territories. A lot of them do not think that they will go back to their homes. When you think about Mariupol, for example,
Mm, mm.
those type of places, they don't think that they're going back to their homes. A lot of them will say that, and so some of them have, because when you think about land swaps, there has not been. Well, first of all, Zelensky says he won't do it, but when you talk to locals here, people kind of have played with their own thoughts about what land could they tolerate going to Russia versus keeping. Ukrainians definitely would say, okay, I want Crimea, right? Which Putin wouldn't do, because that's where his that's where his navy is stationed. He wants maritime land. And so people would say, if in order for this war to stop, if we can go back to pre 2022 conditions and retake Crimea, people would say I could accept that, because the war has been going on in Donbass since 2014. And if you really talk to folks here, from Donbass or from Donetsk, for example, or from Luhansk, which is a very mineral rich part of the country, which is another reason why Putin wants it. And we haven't spoken a lot about that. A lot of minerals there that he could just steal and keep for himself and mine and enrich Russia. Is that people from that part of the region said this war has been going on for more than 10 years, and until 2022, no one really cared. And so would anyone really care if Russia takes that land? Because a lot of people feel like we're not really Ukrainians anyway. That's a deep internal insider baseball type of conversation that
Yeah.
you'll only hear about if you are here. Now, how does that pertain to today, and how does this pertain to Zelensky? Technically, this land that Russia occupies it's territorially, it's under the Constitution, and so they can't do it. And the general consensus in Ukraine is that they don't want Ukraine to surrender any land. And you see a lot of these European leaders that are joining Zelensky for the very simple reason that they don't want him to get jumped like last time. And so they have backup. And so that's why you have the European Avengers, per se,
Yep.
right? If that could be a poster. But they say that we're going to reaffirm our support for Zelensky. What's the questions that we really need to be asking ourselves is, what can they really do, and what type of leverage do the Europeans really have? That's the real question. And so I don't think they have some, but not a lot. And here's why. The NATO alliance is roughly 90% United States. And so much of the weaponry that the United States has, when you think about the when you think about air defense, you think about the uh, when you think about tanks, all those types of things, comes to the United States. The United States needs to give Europe permission to send certain weapon systems to Ukraine. That's another thing. Even though the Europeans technically own them, as far as giving, they just can't give them to any and anyone. It requires cooperation between the U.S. Department of Defense and NATO in order to make that happen for Ukraine. What can the Europeans do in regards to helping Zelensky maintain his current posture, which is not give up any land? We don't know what Trump said to Putin completely. We have all of these tidbits that are being leaked out. I don't honestly trust it, because
Yeah, I
this
don't
was
either.
public before. I don't trust it. And so what the Europeans can do, because here's the thing, this is the more important meeting than the one that took place in Alaska, because you have the biggest heavyweights of the European Union and the European Commission there. And they cannot come out of the White House looking weak, because not only will Ukraine be undermined, but Europe and NATO will also look undermined. And so what I suspect is going to happen is they are going to go in and say, Trump, we're Putin cannot just take over the land. They're going to say Trump, we reject this claim. We reject Putin's request. And the next question is, what will Trump say? Will Trump say, I'm going to withdraw military support? In that turn, what will Europe say? What will Europe be able to fill in? Because they can't fill the hole that America leaves. And so what they can do, however, is they can promise to fast track their own defense industry and fill
Yep.
in that gap. That will take years, and that will also require political will, which goes back to the whole conversation about upcoming elections. Okay, that'll be taking place in France over the next few years. When you think about Britain, because Stammer is not in a particularly strong situation himself in Britain. Okay, And then you think about France, you think about Le Pen's party that's positioned to take that's always a threat. And so, and then you have Italy. Italy is an interesting dynamic because Meloni is a far right
Yep.
nationalist, her whole party, and she interestingly enough has a curiously decent relationship with Trump. So so the outcome would be everything would be status quo, or Trump, or there'll be some, or because I don't see Trump offering Zelensky anything along the lines that I explained earlier. So I think it's just going to be status quo.
So you see, I hope it's status quo. The cynic in me, and perhaps the man who looks at all the previous evidence to predict future behavior, again, anything could change, is that JD Vance has, like I said, met with these right-wing parties and right-wing leaders, Nigel Farage, and also UKIP, the AFD folks. I believe, and also we saw Donald Trump's post from earlier tonight, folks, and those who are joining us, thank you for the 500 people joining us somehow at 2 a.m. my time.
Yeah.
President Zelensky of
Yeah.
Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight. Remember how it started. No getting back Obama given Crimea, and no going into NATO by Ukraine. Some things never change.
But
That's
people are
what
not
he
going to
did.
accept it though. That's okay. So that's a good point. So the next thing he has to do is sell it here. So let me tell you about what's happening here in Ukraine. And let's get back to the really core of the issue that you've heard a lot of these people, a lot of people saying that people are tired of the war and people want the war to end. Yes, they do. But what we're not really clear about is how people in Ukraine want it to end, because the polls never really asked them these type of details. And so, like I said before, if Russia says we will go back to 2022 borders, that will be a start that will make people think. Because the next thing is, what else can we get?
That's
I,
right.
I honestly believe if there is a scenario in which, and I don't think this is going to happen, but if they say we will give, Putin says we will leave Crimea, we just want Donbass. I honestly believe that many Ukrainians, and also send back the tens of thousands of Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped, right?
Can
They
you
will
can you
say,
expand on that? Because I don't think people know. Oftentimes we talk about a high level, but can you just talk about that? The thousands of kids who have been killed and kidnapped, because people don't know that here in
okay,
America.
okay, yes. Let me explain it. So first, since the full-scale invasion of 2022, Ukrainian authorities have said that upwards of 20,000 Ukrainian children are registered to have been abducted by Russia in Russian occupied territories. And so what happens is that Russia comes in, occupies a place, and what they do is that they literally take the kids. They could be a number of things. They could literally take them away from their parents, which is just common, just literally kidnap them. The kids could be in orphanages where, and I forgot the exact number of how many orphanages were in Russian occupied territory, but they could literally go into an orphanage, take the kids, um, and take them to Russian camps where they just brainwash them to be Russians. And what they're ultimately doing is that they turn them into like essentially Russian ROTC soldiers, so that when they turn 18, that they're mentally conditioned to fight their own country.
Winter
So
soldiers.
yeah, yes, yes, yes. So that's actually what's happening right now. And so there are upwards of 20,000 according to Ukraine. There is a American nonprofit organization that has that number at around 35,000. And in addition to the International Criminal Court issuing a arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, he has also issued a warrant for Russia's children's ombudswoman in that as well. Because she is the main perpetrator or the administrator of these abductions of Ukrainian children. And she says hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian children have been abducted. And so I gave you a number of 20,000, which is by the Ukrainians, and hundreds of thousands by the Russians. And so officially you go by the Ukrainian number. And so you don't know where exactly the Russian ombudswoman is getting the hundreds of thousands from. You get what I mean? And so what's happening is that there have been some success stories of Ukrainian children escaping. I've actually spoken to a few of them. And in fact, people support my YouTube channel, Terrell J Starr Official, and subscribe to it. It will help me in the algorithm and everything because in the next month or so, my interview with children who escaped Russian occupation will be up on my YouTube channel. But
Fantastic.
there'll be what some parents do is that they go through the perilous journey of going, leaving Ukrainian territory and going through a town, it's called Voyland, and then they go into Belarus and then through Russia, and then they go into Russian occupied territory of Ukraine, and they search for their kids. And so this trip could take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to a month, right? And so those parents risk not returning with their children and being in prison because they have to go through all of these loops of, okay, what's on my phone? Is there any anti-Russian propaganda? That type of thing, because they can go and get their kids that are rightfully theirs and be brought up on charges by the Russian occupying forces. And so this is a common activity parents of abducted children having to do. And and so the issue is actually pretty bad. And so what they're essentially doing, so Putin, in addition to being a genocidal murderer, he's a child abductor.
Yep.
And so and he's running what may be the largest child abduction operation in all of the world. And it's all done through the auspices of the Russian state. Okay, so you have a situation with Benjamin Netanyahu. He's just killing the kids, right? He's just killing tens of thousands of children. He's not indoctrinating them. He's just murdering them, bombing them. What Putin does is he takes these kids, trains them to be soldiers, send them to the Ukrainian steppe to be killed. And so, I'm not the type of person that gets into an Olympics about which one is worse. They're both fucked up. Let's be quite frank in their own ways, right? And so that's what's happening with Ukrainian children right now. And the point in the kids that I interview, and they're not kids, they're teenagers. Her story has been one where when the Russians came in 2014, because she's been under occupation, her name is Marta. And I can say her name because she spoke publicly. Marta, she was 8 years old when the Russians occupied her home in Donetsk. And so she said that it was just a strange thing. She saw the Ukrainian flag, then these Russian soldiers came in and they raised the Russian flag. What happens? What is it like being a child in Russian occupied territory? If you are a schoolgirl, right? You're a 12-year-old girl, 10-year-old girl, 12-year-old girl. The Russian soldiers come to the school and get a pick of the litter to see which girls that they're going to molest. Yes. So being in middle school, 12, 13, doesn't matter. You are subject to being sexually abused by Russian soldiers, and there's nothing that you can do about it. The teachers know about it. Everyone knows about it. It's just a commonly accepted thing that happens. And with Martha, her whole thing was, I'm just lucky that they didn't pick me. But I have plenty of friends, and I know people at my school who went home with the Russian soldier, and we know what that means. And so they also have to deal with the idea that their parents are indoctrinated. And so they can't go and talk to their parents about the abuse because the parents will blame them. Marta said that when she escaped, she found a organization called Helping to Leave. And so she didn't tell her parents. She had her 18th birthday in Donetsk, and Donetsk, which is a city of formerly of 1 million people. It's a ghost town with hardly running electricity, constant power outages, and the city is roughly about 500,000 according to her estimates. And she says that it's so outdated that when you go to the movie theater, you don't have access to new movies. They're just old, basically Chinese reruns that you see every day. And so it's actually about 5 minutes, 5 years or so backwards in
Behind.
time
Yeah.
because they're just not exposed to anything. And so with the kids, she said that Martha, she escaped. It took her a week, and she had to kind of like fake a whole bunch of stuff, not tell her parents. And so she is in Kyiv right now, and she has to start off from scratch. And so when she hears that Trump wants to give up her home, she says, I have to start over again. So just think about Martha when you think about we're going to give up Donetsk. And because she says that there are people still in Donetsk who don't understand any of the conversations that we're having. They don't know about these dealings with Trump. They don't understand that world powers are literally doing a Yalta type of setup where they're dividing the world in their country. And so she says that there are people back home that are waiting for Ukraine to liberate them.
Mm.
That's what's happening right now. And so they have no idea that there's this, and I'm talking about kids, okay? There's no idea that this prospect of their home being given to Russia is even a consideration.
I appreciate that, Terrell, because if you look at the through lines, you see the abuse of girls, the exploitation of girls through Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. And Jeffrey Epstein said that Donald Trump was his closest friend. And I had a reporter, Michael Wolf, here, who has audio tapes, who said that Epstein and Trump in the 90s used to party and hunt for models. I asked him how old, ages 14 to 20. And we see how Donald Trump treats pedophiles. Ghislaine Maxwell wishes her well, sends her, and no one knows why. We all know why because of quid pro quo, but it's a sweetheart deal. Gets sent from Florida to Texas in a sweetheart deal where now she's cleared for work release, whether or not she'll take it, but she's cleared. As this is happening, he has also pardoned 1,600 insurrectionists, including violent insurrection, and some of them now are working in the Trump administration. And he has literally rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin, a war criminal who interfered in the US election, is an enemy of democracy, an enemy of the United States, says that the worst tragedy that ever happened was the fall of the USSR, wants to, in his lifetime, recreate the USSR, the Russian Empire, and like you just said, under his leadership has kidnapped at the bare minimum 20,000 children or possibly more. Even 20,000 children is an obscene number. And that's the man that he met, filleted, gave verbal fellatio to, clapped for, on America's soil, a man who's wanted by the International Criminal Court, but yet he unleashes the National Guard against innocent brown immigrants who make this country run and on
Because
the
yeah, because
Well,
he want because he wants to be Putin. So let's go to that. Let's go to that presser after Alaska, because I honestly don't care what was said at the Alaska meeting. I honestly think that it's really inconsequential. What I do care about is the optics afterwards, because this is what Putin was looking for. He was looking for leverage. He was looking for optics because those things matter to him. And they all crystallized in that 12-minute or so presser in which Putin spoke for about 8 or 9 minutes, and Trump
yep,
spoke for about a minute and a half.
yep.
Can you imagine
In Russian, he
Obama
spoke in Russian.
and Russian? And by the way, the man does speak English
Yeah, of course, he
because
did. It was very deliberate.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So he can't, but he never does, but he can, right? It's not Lavrov level English, but the man can effectively speak English. He can have a conversation with us right now, Putin. All right, so here's the thing. So Putin said a number of things, such as we had cooperation with the United States during World War II. When you think about Anchorage, Alaska, I was coming around the city and I saw all the Russian Orthodox style churches that are here. And then he also talked about Ukraine being the brotherly nation. Meanwhile, when that all was going on, you could hear air raid sirens outside of my window. The the freaking irony of it all, right? But most critically, when Trump spoke for a minute and a half, he stood up. And by the way, by all measures, Trump is listed as 6'2.5" or 6'3" or whatever, right?
Hunched
Uh,
over.
huh?
Hunched over.
Hunched over, yeah, hunched over, right? And so meanwhile, you have Putin, who's about 5 feet something. He came across being the larger man in stature and importance. He took up the room, this short man standing up against a man who stands over 6 feet tall, assumed all of the alpha energy in the
In the
room,
United States of
and,
America.
in the United States of America. But when Trump spoke, he said, we had a really great meeting and we had to deal with a lot, and he had to deal with the host. I know it was a host. He knows it was a host. Everybody knew that it was a hoax. And so he was pretty much telegraphing the essence of what Putin was doing, which was manipulating him.
Yep.
Because
Yep.
what Trump, and so much of the reason that Trump is pushing for Zelensky to concede, because peace is a ruse. He wants to be able to go to his base and say that I did something important. And so I don't want people to, for everyone that's listening, please do not over exaggerate what's going on here. Trump wants a shiny toy, i.e., a victory to say, I did this and give me a Pulitzer Prize, because the Finnish president is going to be a part of the entourage surrounding Zelensky. And Trump, during his call with the Finnish with the president, said, "I want I want a Nobel Prize," right? And I don't know if he's, and forgive me right now, I have a bit of a brain fart. I don't know if it's actually Sweden that actually gives the prize, but I think it's Finland. But at any rate, he wants a Pulitzer Prize, and he asked the president, not Pulitzer Prize, but a Nobel Prize,
Nobel Peace Prize.
Nobel Peace Prize, right? And so he said, and that's going to
Norway.
be
Oslo, Norway.
Yeah, yeah, Oslo, Norway, yeah. And so, thank you. And so, basically, he wants to be able to say, "I did something. I created peace." He doesn't care what Putin does afterwards. He just wants to be able to say, "I did this because Obama got it." He's, in many ways, he's chasing Obama's shadow, because he wants something. He wants, is not necessarily the prize, it's what comes with it. He wants adulation. He
Yeah.
wants the world community to love him. And regardless, look, the two of us can have a separate conversation about our critiques about Obama. I think that we could do it very effectively and very easily. Like, we could do it. But one thing about Obama, when he came in and he had that prize, it was because of George W. Bush being so bad.
And
And the
that's why
world,
Obama, honestly, folks, I've said this before recently. I say it again because I was old enough to remember. It was the badness of George W. Bush, the tanking of the economy, the lies, the war on terror. If George W. Bush wasn't that bad, we would never had a Barack Hussein Obama become the
yeah,
first black president.
that's legitimately fair, right? And so the thing about Obama was that the world adored him.
Yep.
Trump wants that so much, and that prize is not going to give it to him. But
He'll
he
never get
wants,
it.
yeah, but yeah, because Europe hates him, right? Because and so they're not going to give him a consolation prize of, hey, guy, if this does go his way, and give him a prize for it. They're not going to do that because that would be something that would be an easy way to undermine Ukraine, and they'll never do that because they don't benefit from giving him that prize. But a final point is, one thing that people don't know about these types of meetings, and I bring up Obama for a particular reason. Think about the Iran deal and the years of back channel conversations that it took for John Kerry, because John Kerry was the main person, the interlocutor, that was working with Sergei Lavrov, right? In order to get this deal done. So, Obama reportedly had meetings with then president, because remember, at first it was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And so when Obama came in, it was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad of
Yep.
Iran, right? And so Mahmoud, we know who he was. He was, saying he was a firecracker. But then you had, I believe the guy's name was uh, Houdini, something like that. But the president that succeeded Ahmadinejad, he was considered to be a lot more open, right? And so that was when the back channels really started. And so they spent years setting up the conditions so that when they did meet, they were actually able to get something effectively put into
I,
writing,
I
right?
wanted to double check. I knew Rouhani.
Rouhani, yes, Rouhani. Yeah, I knew it was that's Rouhani, yes. And so he, but it took years to do that, because you were dealing with people who are legitimate diplomats who understood how the process worked, and you were dealing with a president in Obama who was young, but he was a highly competent intellectual person, right? And so with this meeting in Alaska, what people need to know is that there were no back channel conversations to set up preconditions to make the meeting worth it. And so Trump has a penchant for having meetings with people just so he can say, I met with this person. And if it doesn't work out, if it doesn't work out, then he can blame the parties that he tried to bring together. So think about
Well, it
Kim
just
Jong.
happened recently with Tim Cook. He says Tim Cook has promised $100 billion investment. There was no contract. He just wanted the photo op. Tim Cook came and gave him a 24-karat bust. He used that as a photo op in the headline. There's literally no contract, nothing in writing about the $100 billion investment, and he moved on.
Kim Jong. So think about Kim Jong. Right. So think about Kim Jong Un. So they met during this first term, and there were no preconditions met for Kim Jong Un to have a realistic conversation with him at all. Right. But what he wants to say is that I met with him. I tried to talk with him for what the same. So and another interesting thing, because I want to explain this to people because they don't a lot. I want to explain how the sausage is really made. Is that now with Kim Jong Un, his father, under the Clinton administration, there was a Secretary of State named William Perry, and
Yep.
William Perry had a number of meetings with Kim Jong Un's daddy. And the main thing, and that was the closest that we really ever got to having some semblance of a peaceful existence with North Korea. And what the North Koreans wanted was food and energy,
Yep.
right? And a number of security guarantees. Now, at the time, if you're all old enough, you remember that, and I was like in high school, but I was really a student, looking at politics. But we had a man named Newt Gingrich, who was in office, and so like the pre-Tea Party type of politician, whatever, right? And so the guy
90s.
who came in on the values of family, even though he went down in shame because of his own, extramarital behavior and all this other stuff, right? But basically,
Cheating on his wife with cancer, if I remember correctly.
yeah. So they undermine this deal that William Perry set up, right? Because we have to be tough against North Korea. Kind of like a lot of people are pushing back against Obama, but Obama said, look, they could the Iranians can say whatever they want so long as they don't produce like enriched uranium to the degree that they could produce a nuclear weapon. And so like that work is boring. It requires people who are statesmen and stateswomen. It requires institutional knowledge. It requires you to have an understanding of world affairs and how are we supposed to be positioned in the world. Trump is thinking about how he positions himself. And let's look at, I'm going to show you a list of people who are at the Alaska meeting just to give you a comparison to what's happening. So look at the Russian delegation that was there on Friday for
I
Russia.
saw Lavrov's photo there.
Okay, Sergei Lavrov, who's been the foreign minister since 2014, a man
Hmm.
who is incredibly fluent in English. He's a career diplomat. He spent a decade as the Russian ambassador to the UN before he became the foreign secretary. Then you have Yuri Ushakov. And so he's the foreign policy advisor, another fluent English speaker who served as Russia's ambassador from 1998 to 2008. Andrei Belousov, who is the defense minister, who is somebody who's a top who's a top aide, right? And then you have Kirill Dmitriev, who is the Russian Direct Investment Fund chief. He's one of the younger guys, a Harvard and Stanford educated guy who has a lot of close connections with with American billionaires, right? And so then you had the finance minister Anton Siluanov, and he has been in his post since 2011 and who understands Russian sanctions very well. Okay, so let's look comparatively to who the Americans sent. Okay, because again, I want us to know that, because Trump says we're against DEI and all these people that are these minorities, people like you and I, we're there because the color of our skin and that bad affirmative action. I want to show you the best and brightest that the Americans sent to this juggernaut of a Russian delegation.
Mediocrity.
Little Marco Rubio, who was severely, the junior senator who was severely inexperienced and in a diplomatic post, who kisses Donald Trump's butt as much as Trump gives Putin fellatio. That's who we have here. Then we have John Ratcliffe, former congressman. He was director of intelligence for a
But
year.
he also trumped up his resume, and also is thoroughly underqualified.
Right,
But
right,
continue.
and I'm getting right,
Yeah.
correct. So I'm getting to the point that so these titles don't mean the same thing as the titles of their Russian counterparts. Okay, and so that's the thing, right? So these people have these titles because it was handed to them, right? They don't. They're paper tigers. Okay, so let's look at Steve Witkoff, who is a 68-year-old who's a special envoy to Kyiv and to Europe. And this guy is a real estate magnate who has no type of knowledge about the world and international affairs and what have you, right? And so you have Scott Besnett, who's a billionaire investor, and then you have Howard Lutnick, who's Wall
Billionaire.
Street, who's another billionaire. Look,
It's the Monstars versus the Toon Squad without Michael Jordan.
let me tell you. Okay, so I'm going to tell you why this is very dangerous. The Russians, I wish I had the book here. I have it. I have it on my bookcase at home. And so, the Russians, when you think about espionage, they've been doing it longer than Americans have. The Russians are very good at compromise. They're very good at intel. And one of the things that the Russians understood, there's a Russian author by the name of Andre, I think is I'll think of his name later. But basically, there are two Russian authors that specialize in Russian intelligence, and they wrote a book. And basically, they wrote several books, but one of them deals with how the Russian KGB, before they became the FSB, they understood what could manipulate America, and they decided that we would take decades to understand America's banking system.
Mm.
Because one things that Americans like is money. And so with this Trump lineup, can you imagine what the Russians promised them? Because think about the lineup with the Russians. They sent their finance minister. They sent their chief wealth investors from the Kremlin, who actually have real, legitimate diplomatic experience in addition to the business experience. And so all you have to do is promise these guys some real estate deals. The idea of and they played to their business interests and their greed. That's all it took.
Yep.
And so these guys don't come in with any sense of how do I make America safe? How do I make the world safer? How do I see 10 years or 20 years down the line? Right? They're thinking about what they can get today. And so these are people, if I'm an American, I would be terrified because you have a whole bunch of billionaires that only care about themselves because they've shown the American people on American soil that they only care about themselves. And so that why would the Russians have a different approach other than to manipulate that? And so
It's
this,
all
yeah,
it's all quid pro quo, folks. And you just saw the Genius Act that was passed, the first pro crypto bill, the big beautiful bill that adds $3 trillion to the gives permanent tax cuts to the rich people. You saw Donald Trump openly sell access to himself. Saying whoever buys the most Trump crypto gets an exclusive dinner with me, and whoever buys the most, I'll give them a private tour. And then you had, I think it was New York Times or Washington Post reported, off the record, foreign analysts saying that is an easy opening for any country. They're like, this is great. We could literally bribe our way to get into his ear by just buying his stupid crypto. So that's literally, he's setting himself up for a quid pro quo, an ATM. He's a man who, remember, stole national confidential secrets, lied to the FBI, refused to give them. They were like in his shitter in Mar-a-Lago, right? None of this is made up, folks. This is happening in real time. And then all these people who have no qualifications when it comes to diplomacy, when it comes to, governmental affairs, when it comes to dealing with the monstars, the all-stars, the Avengers of an opposing team, these people are rich billionaires who have come in. And if I'm Russian, I'd be like, all right, well, I'll just sell you something. Let's go quid pro quo. You like the bar is low as F. You'll sell out anything and anyone. And so
Let me bring this book. The book I want to bring up real quick.
yeah,
It's okay. So the book I was bringing up is by Andrei Soldatov and Irina Borogin, and the book's title is called "The Co-Patriots: The Brutal and Chaotic History of Russia's Exiles, Immigrants, and Agents Abroad." So
what's the
Andre,
first? What's the name of the title again?
the
The
title,
crew,
"The Co-Patriots."
the co-patriots.
Yes, the co-patriots, the brutal and chaotic history of Russia's exiles, immigrants, and agents abroad. And so these are two journalists who,
I have it. I have it as the compatriots.
yeah,
Uh,
correct, compatriots, yeah.
yeah, the folks, for those who are listening, the Compatriots came out about 5 years ago. The brutal and chaotic history of Russia's exiled emigres and agents abroad by Andrei Soldatov and Irina Borogan.
Yes, Bordeaux. And so the reason why I think this is important is that the Russians understand that we can manipulate you by using your money. And and so people look at this lineup and they think, okay, we have all these experienced business people and they can make a deal. Running a country is not like running a business. People think that it is, but it's not. It requires a different level of thinking versus I'm going to run this business. I'm going to run this business to make profit versus I'm going to run this country to protect our sovereignty.
Hmm.
And as an American leader, you have to think about what sovereignty means for the rest of the world. And so when you think about the whole tariff situation, I'm not going to get into that because that's not what we're here, but I think it's important to draw the links is that the thing about dealing with greedy billionaires who think about now, the whole tariff war, you know, if you remember Prime Minister Carney in Canada saying, we had this relationship with the United States. It was beautiful. It was great. And we had all these years of glorious cooperation. No more.
Yeah.
It may not hit now when Trump is in office. And by the way, I suspect that he's going to stay because he wants to avoid persecution. I totally think that he's not going to leave freely. But anyway, after Trump, when he dies, whatever, the damage that will have been done, and
Generational.
he will, it's generational, and he will not be alive to account for it. And so when we think about these foreign policy decisions, we're talking about Ukraine. The real question is, yes, the two of us, we're both progressive thinkers and we're both progressive, when we think about the world, we're morally consistent about Palestine. We're morally consistent about what's happening here in Ukraine. However, the reason why Americans should care about this is that we have to make a decision of, are we better stewards of the world in which we live than Russia is? We have to say that. And the answer is yes, we are.
Yep.
And with that responsibility requires a moral clarity, which is why we have to speak up for Palestine as much as we're speaking up for here and being morally consistent about it. Because eventually, what will happen is that if we allow this border to move closer to Europe, we're saying that certain people can be forsaken, and we have to consider the fact that someone, when they're in a position of power, can say that we can be forsaken.
Yep.
Because we never think about that. But Rome was, and Rome isn't. And so we have to think about these things and, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. That's how a real leader thinks. And for all of our criticisms for Barack Obama, at least with this Iran deal specifically, he did that.
Right.
Trump, with this meeting, shows that he doesn't care about anything other than himself. He extracts, he manipulates, he steals, he cheats, he destroys, just like Putin. Do we want Putin and Trump and Orban and Le Pen and the Brexit crew to run our world? because we don't think it's going to affect us. It's just in Ukraine right now, but we don't think it'll reach us. It can. And we have an opportunity to influence the way in which our world functions by choosing the right leaders to help to inform the decisions that are good for all of us. And people made a mistake in 2024. They don't have to repeat it in 2028.
Inshallah, if we still have free and fair elections, I have said before that when he talked about electoral reform, he would cheat. And now you see what's happening in Texas with
Oh, yeah.
gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I share your fear, and I've said it openly and consistently. I hope I'm wrong. If I am wrong, I will gladly eat halal
You're not
crow.
wrong. Let's stop. No, see, here's the thing. This is what people messed up in 2016. I was not surprised that Trump won because I know this country. Why is it that we don't seriously consider that Trump won't leave? He's hinted to the idea that he won't multiple times. His team has thrown it out there. Why don't we take them seriously? And I'm saying this, and I'm reinforcing this with us because, as I think especially as people of color, um, our expertise and our experiences are not really recognized and respected until white people confirm it.
Yep.
And I just want us to recognize that our fears are not only legitimate, but they're based on experience and they're based on the things that are coming out of Trump's mouth. And so I totally am prepared to do what I can as an individual to hit the streets, thinking about what my bail money will look like to be arrested, because I want the history to know that Terrell Jermaine Starr, you will find some arrest, document that I at least said that this is unacceptable.
Yep.
Because I do not expect that man to leave. When you think about the fact that what's the guy who was the special prosecutor? His name was Jack
Smith.
Smith. Yeah. From my understanding, he left open the possibility that a future Department of Justice can continue the investigation, even though he reluctantly decided not to pursue it further. And so Trump can still face persecution. He's currently fighting cases right now. And so the case was thrown out in Georgia, depending on what the next election in Georgia can look like, because Georgia is becoming blue, which is another thing that Trump fears, the browning of America.
Yep.
Georgia in the next 10 years, we can totally see that being a Democratic state. And so Trump fears this. And so because of all this, I don't think Trump is intelligent enough to understand all of these demographic developments that are happening, but he understands his own survival. And that's very simple, is that he's been privileged all his life. And up until this point, he has gotten away with sexually assaulting people, cheating on his taxes,
Insurrection, fraud,
insurrections,
defamation.
fraud, all of these things. So why would we think that this man would leave when he has every incentive to stay? So no, I want you, sir, to trust your intuition and your fears that this man will not leave, because everything points to the fact that you are right.
Oh, well, amen. But what the world's worst? I told you so, and I hope I'm wrong. I look at the evidence.
I
I
don't think
take
we
him
are.
literally. I take him literally and seriously. He's a man who did an insurrection. He pardoned the insurrectionists. He said he wants to be a dictator for a day. He said he wants to terminate the Constitution. The one quote I mention every day since October, I said he just quoted Hitler and said he would unleash the National Guard and military against the enemies from within. I kept bringing it up. I said, if this man wins, he will do that. And lo and behold, we, not you and me, but this country and corporate media has normalized the National Guard and the military being used against American people. That's the normalization. That's the first step. The second step will be unleashing it against all quote unquote enemies. You see that happening in DC. The third step will be him doing it against anyone and everyone across. Doesn't even matter Republicans. Republicans, they'll think they'll be safe. Wait until the economy tanks and Epstein files keep eroding the trust, right? And then finally, when it comes to 2026 or 2028, if he feels like he might lose the House or the Senate, or the White House, this man is not going to leave. He's going to leave as a dead man, or he's going to leave in chains. I do not think this man will ever leave in a normal, peaceful way. I hope to be proven wrong. Terrell, it is 2:45 a.m. where I'm at. I'm amazed that there's 500 people watching, but that's fantastic. That's the strength of this community. It's very informed and smart, and that's the testament to your brilliance as a very informed expert on Ukraine. For the half a thousand people who have joined us at 11:30, 11:45 Pacific time, 2:45 Eastern time, 9:45 Ukraine time. I'm speaking to a writer, YouTube host, a Substack editor, an expert on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, Terrell J. Starr. He has a master's in the subject, and he's in Kyiv right now. He's actually a Ukrainian expert in Ukraine. We will have this up on our respective Substacks within the next hour. Strongly recommend, if people are up listening to this from the beginning with the transcript, if you have a few dollars, send it to Terrell. He's completely independent. He has a YouTube channel and he has a Substack. If you don't have the money, become at least a free subscriber. This is the left hook. There are no paywalls. If you have some money, give it to Terrell. If you have a couple of bucks afterwards, I've kept it super cheap. If you have no money, at least become a free subscriber. I don't believe in paywalls during the death of democracy. I believe people should be informed. People, be empathetic, be kind. And Terrell, before I let you go, final word to you, and shamelessly promote yourself better than I have.
Yes, thank you all very much for having me on. So I am the host of the Terrell J. Starr Official Substack, as well as Terrell J. Starr Official YouTube. I talk about Ukraine in a very relatable way. I talk about, share stories all from around the country about how Ukrainians experience the war, as well as its relationship with the rest of the world. So you can go to both of those channels, as well as my Instagram, Terrell J. Starr, and also Blue Sky, Terrell J. Starr Official. You can find me there as well. Thank you very much for having me on. This is the second time. We always have great conversations, and I hope that you all gain something from me in regards to not only just understanding the headlines, but um, the process and the emotions and the real life feeling of the day-to-day life here in Ukraine.
Yeah, and fantastic that we got so many great folks here from the UK, from Europe, from America. I just saw someone's from Egypt, and for all of you who are going to be watching at normal human times. By the way, I'm a night owl, so now that I know that there's 500 people like me staying up, this is terrible because I don't sleep either. So I'm going to probably call on you again, Terrell, and other folks who are international, because hey, if someone else is willing to talk to me. I'm up at crazy hours. My wife gave up on me a long time ago. So, folks, the Left Hook Substack. I'm talking to Terrell J. Starr. I will link to his Substack and his YouTube. This will be up in an hour for those who tuned in late. I strongly recommend listening from the start. We're going to have President Zelensky with the European All Stars Avengers as his beatdown crew or backup crew meet President Trump. Uh, Terrell seems to be a little bit more optimistic than I am. I feel like he will unleash little Marco and JD to humiliate his counterparts. I hope I'm wrong. But let's see. I hope he might have learned from his lesson from February. But judging from Trump's post earlier today, same old, same old. Vladimir Putin gets to steamroll him, gets to come here on U.S. soil as a war criminal, speak in Russian, and leave without any concessions. And he's demanding concessions from Ukraine. I want to remind people, Ukraine is the one that is occupied. Ukrainians are the ones fighting for self-determination and their freedom. Russia is the one that has invaded. And we should always stand with occupied people, matter if they're in Kashmir, in Gaza, in Ukraine. We should always stand for those who are trying to fight for their freedom and self-determination. We should be morally consistent at the very least. Folks, stay informed, stay kind, be empathetic, and please, oh please, don't be a fascist. Terrell, talk to you soon, buddy. Stay safe.
All right, peace.